Hi, everyone. Thanks for clicking in and listening to the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition podcast. As you know by now, our podcasts are a series of roundtable discussions with industry luminaries that tackle trends and sustainable practices within the fast-growing cannabis industry. I'm your host, Dana Hillman, VP of Business Development for GrowIQ. For this episode, we'll be talking sustainability in the context of the cannabis industry and more specifically lighting with two guests from one of the founding members of the SCC, GrowGeneration. So if you're in the cannabis space, you've probably heard of GrowGeneration. They're one of the nation's largest suppliers of equipment supplies for cannabis producers and have a deep knowledge of the space. So today from GrowGen, we're lucky to have Andrew Harling, their Director of R&D, and Josh Armitage, their Commercial Account Manager, here to talk about sustainability and specifically lighting. So for all of you that have questions about what types of lighting can produce the best plants, stay tuned because that's definitely on the menu. Andrew and Josh, thanks for taking time to speak today. Really appreciate it.
Hey, no problem, man. We appreciate you having us on.
My pleasure. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. So for those of you that don't know Andrew and Josh, I'm going to give you a little bit of teaser. So Andrew is a bit of a Renaissance man with a serious musical background, like real musical background. He's also a grower with some serious R&D chops. And Josh, well, he's a grower too, and also the knower of all things knowable when it comes to lighting design for cannabis facilities. So no pressure, guys, but glad you're here today.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Cool. So as always, I think it's important to give listeners a little context about who you guys are and how you came into the business and what you're all about. So if you wouldn't mind just share a little bit of your backgrounds, that'd be great. And Andrew, if it's okay, we'll just start with you and go around the horn.
Yeah, no problem. Let's see. I got into the sport of growing in earnest right around 1995, basically coming right out of high school. And over the past 25 years, I have probably had less than 6 months during that entire period of time where I'm not at least operating some sort of grow. And always continuing to try new techniques, new nutrients, new lighting, everything that comes down the pipeline. Really love it. Love to geek out on it. I've been working in the industry since right around 2009 or 2010, when the laws started to really change very rapidly in Colorado. It became apparent that if I was going to continue to be a part of this industry, that I needed to, make some moves towards working with a legitimate organization and, try to move away from living harvest to harvest and that kind of thing.
Cool. Well, and you're also working on the R&D side of things for GrowGeneration, right?
I am working on the R&D as well as the product development side of things for GrowGeneration. This is it's a big agenda item for us in 2021. We have fairly aggressive goals, and what we've really done with regards to that is we started with some of the low-hanging fruit. And in that sense, I'm talking about things like, plastics, saucers, nursery pots, trimmers, trellis, everything that you can imagine that gets used in a grow that at this point, most growers don't have a whole hell of a lot of specificity with regards to brands that they're utilizing for these items. And subsequently, we are now moving into a phase where we're attacking some of the bigger pieces. We are rolling out, or we've already released an LED fixture that is in our stores and out there and available right now. We do have HID as well as CMH lights, bulbs, I mean, really, kind of you name it, man. It's coming down the pipeline.
Oh, that's very cool. Very cool. And Josh, what about you, man? Because I know you've been in the industry a while yourself. So maybe give some background.
All right, so I've got a little over 12 and a half years in the industry. I started off late 2008 out in Southern California at a small hydro shop, Discount Hydro in Riverside, sweeping the floors. From there, I kind of, worked myself up through that company and was able to branch off into sales and really get involved with the growers and starting with the cultivation designs and things like that. Of course, back then at that point in time, commercial cannabis wasn't a thing. So everything was black market. There was commercial cannabis, but it wasn't the way we know it today. So everything was black market, had to be really hush hush and discreet about how we operated. I did that for a few years, and then I branched off to a lighting company where I started really getting involved with lighting, Solus Tech Digital Lighting. I was their national sales manager and commercial consultant for 8.5 years. With that position, I was able to travel up and down the West Coast, putting up cultivations, helping with cultivations. I worked with a lot of the big growers in the industry, helping them design and do lighting layouts. I've been involved with a lot of some of the quote unquote OGs of lighting.
Yeah.
Guys that have, brought over the first HPS light back in the early 80s, things like that. So I've been blessed to be able to work next to some of these guys and pick their brains and just kind of learn as much as I can, about lighting in general. Just the science behind it has always kind of interested me.
Yeah.
I do enjoy growing. Growing is something that I'm very passionate about, something that I'll continue to do and I've done for several years. I plan on, growing until I die, per se. So with that being said,
hopefully that's not going to be soon, brother.
No. We should be good to go. I'm hoping I got a few years left, but yeah, that's kind of where I started off at. And, being with the GrowGen team has been great. It's been able to really elevate my platform as far as being able to share the knowledge that I've been, able to pick up through the years.
Yeah, no, that's great. And as our listeners probably guessed, we will be talking about lighting and definitely in the broader context of sustainability. Something I know that's kind of near and dear to both you guys are. But so here's the first thing I'm going to lob over the fence. So, and I think I may know the answer, but in the context of lighting, you guys speak to customers all the time, right? Some from large multi-state operators to boutique growers. So give it to me. What's the number one question that pops up most when you're talking about lighting to customers?
You want to take that, Josh, or you want me to jump in?
I can take it. So the big one really right now today is LED versus HPS or LED versus ceramic metal halide. Those are really the main questions that I get hit with a lot. So I like to, there are advantages and disadvantages of both.
Yeah.
For sustainability, energy, conservation, things like that, LEDs definitely play a major factor compared to HPS. However, HPS is the workhorse. HPS, double-ended fixtures, those have been around since the beginning, and that's kind of what has gotten us to where we're at.
Andrew, is that what you would you mirror that, or is there a slightly different?
I would mirror that. I would definitely say that some of the more pointed questions that are heavily pressed upon me by commercial customers with regards to lighting specifically, at least in terms of investing in new technology or investing in new gear moving forward, is what's going to ultimately give me the greatest return on my investment. Unfortunately, I mean, I guess I would say right now, I think from the business owner's perspective, there's a little bit more of an emphasis on cost efficiency, and they all want to know about potential rebates from the energy companies in their local municipalities and things of that nature. But really, they want to know, if I switch to LEDs, in the long term, is this a good move for me to make? It's been a situation for a long time, a long time at this point, that HPS, like Josh said, it's the workhorse. You can set up cheap, or at least the lighting portion of that is inexpensive on the initial layout compared to most LED products. And most people that are in this industry have a pretty darn good idea what they can expect to pull off of 1,000-watt HPS. Yeah. So there's a level of familiarity and consistency and deliverable results from round to round to round that have kept those technologies viable. That being said, I definitely feel like we are in the middle of somewhat of a lighting renaissance, be that driven by legislation and laws that are starting to come out, but really most people that are looking at it intelligently, in my mind, are looking at how do they operate their business in the long term with the most cost efficient measures. And there are a number of different ways above and beyond simply being lower wattage and lower heat creation that LEDs save money for growers and commercial operators.
Yeah, so it seems like with lighting, it comes back to energy on some level when you're talking about sustainability and all that. Can you give me an idea? What's the realistic energy savings that you'll get from, say, LED versus traditional HID lighting?
So a typical HID fixture is running 1,000 watts. If some of them have a hyper, a fifth gear, if you will, and you can push them to 1,100. But they produce significantly more heat. And obviously, if you're pulling 1,100 watts per bulb, per fixture, you are utilizing a significant amount of electricity. Yeah. And most of the comparable LED fixtures that are on the market right now, I would say range from somewhere between 650 and about 750 watts. So you could look at it as right off the top, saving somewhere in the ballpark of 30% on your electrical consumption. Mm-hmm. And when you look at it from the perspective of, each watt that you're utilizing in your grow, whether it be from HID or CMH or LED, watts of watt, they generate a certain amount of heat and require a certain amount of corresponding HVAC. But if you can cut both the electricity and the HVAC by 30% right off the top, you've made a pretty big dent. And obviously that is exponential depending on the size of the organization.
Yeah. Well, and Josh, quick question for you, because I know you're out in the field and you're talking to these guys, or at least the growers, a lot. Are HVAC concerns and just basic heat buildup, is that one of the issues that lead them to LED, or is it just energy initially?
It's a little bit of both. The initial, would definitely be the heat. Heat is a huge factor in your grow, and it does, have it can be detrimental if it's not controlled, to the plants. So in areas such as areas like in Arizona, where you're looking at 123 degrees, in the summer. Areas like that with high humidity. Oklahoma's a good state. It gets hot and it's humid. Putting an LED into a facility, not only is it going to save you when it comes down to your HVAC costs, but just the overall energy or savings that you're, accruing because of using LEDs. LEDs today are just the most efficient when it comes down to sustainability for a lot of different reasons. It's not just with, energy consumption or whatnot, but to circle back HVAC, yeah, that is definitely one of the big concerns.
Yeah, and
not to mention the amount of potential funds that can be saved for an organization having to hire employees to jump up on ladders and change out HPS lights every handful of months. You know, if we're talking
that's a good
about
point.
Well, and disposal.
organizations with 1,000 lights, and you got to pay somebody to jump up there every 4, 6, 12 months, whatever your protocol happens to be, pay them to get up on a ladder. You know, there's liability concerns there, there's safety concerns, and there's dollar concerns, both in terms of the replacement of the lamp itself and the labor hours that you're paying for somebody to jump up there and change those bulbs
As well
out.
as the disposal of the bulbs. We have to remember that those bulbs, the old
yeah.
HID bulbs, you know, they have a lot of mercury and chemicals in there that are just dangerous for people and the environment. So switching over to LED or something more, you know, sustainable, ceramic metal halide, you know, another a good example, you know, switching over to one of those two technologies compared to HID overall, you know, is just greener. It's just healthier. And a lot of these companies, I mean, you know, if you're running 1,000 fixtures and you're switching out 1,000 bulbs, you know, that's a lot of money. A lot of these disposal sites, you know, they could charge you $5,000 to $6,000 to get rid of these lamps.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
interesting. You know, it's funny. I didn't really think about that, guys. I mean, considering the labor and then also the impact on the waste stream too. That's that's pretty important, especially if we're paying those disposal costs. Wow. So
And then beyond that, there's also, and this should be you know, definitely a point that we touch on, whether this is the appropriate place for that or not, I'm not sure, but the light spectrum that's coming from the LED
dude, I was
fixtures
just
that are-
going to ask you about that
Yeah.
because that's
Very
one
important.
of the things. That's one of the things that I've seen, or at least people are concerned about, is degradation of, you know, light source and par values and the spectrum, you know, with HID versus LED. And the other piece of it, just does LED work as well? So
Yes.
I'll shut up now.
So I can jump in here, Andrew, on this one. So
Go for
LEDs,
it.
you know, 5, 6 years ago, LEDs on the market, they weren't there. They had what we refer to them as the blurple spectrum. And this was a real deep purple spectrum that a lot of the facility or the LED manufacturers are starting to, you know, introduce to the industry. Now that particular spectrum and those particular fixtures are phenomenal when it comes down to growing vegetables, when it comes down to growing tomatoes, microgreens, things like that. With what we're growing, no, that those aren't the most suitable. And the reason for that, basically what I like to refer to is, you know, a new customer comes up to me and I'm pitching them and teaching them about spectrums and things like that. I always refer to that we're growing indoors. So the object is to mimic the sun. When you're running a traditional HPS light, when you walk into that grow room, you have more of a yellow spectrum, you know, the orange spectrum that we're used to. But when you look outside in the springtime, when plants are actually growing, you know, flowering or whatnot, you don't see that spectrum. You see a fuller spectrum. So with that being said, the whole name of the game is to be able to mimic what they're doing outdoors, indoors. Now, LEDs, because of the way the technology has evolved over the years, I'd say within the past 3 years, they've gotten to the point now where most LED manufacturers have dialed in the proper spectrums. They've dialed in the proper drivers. They've figured out, you know, the heat sinks, different, you know, nuances when it comes down to the fixtures. And a lot of them are pretty much on point. You still run across a lot of the LEDs that are still kind of skewed when it comes down to the spectrum. But for the most part, I like to always copy the CMH, the ceramic metal halide. I like to compare the ceramic metal halide compared to an LED because the ceramic metal halide is known to be more of a hybrid as a full spectrum lamp. So, you know, that's really where it's at. The technology is there, but switching from LED or switching to LED from HID, there is a learning curve. So you're not just going to take down an HPS lamp and replace it with an LED and expect to produce the same results. There's always a learning curve when it comes down to it. If a grower is not familiar with growing with LED, you know, we recommend the grower picking up a few fixtures and doing a test room. That way they can get used to it because your environment doesn't completely change, but it does change. Right. So you have to be able to work with the environment. Of course, be able to introduce your plants into that environment too.
Right. Well, Andrew, I know you've been kind of lucky enough to beat on a lot of the products that you guys sell. I mean, is that what you're finding too? That you can grow as good with LED?
Yeah, actually, I'm finding very consistently that LED fixtures between, again, somewhere 650 to 750 watts. Typically, I can not only pull the same yield that I would off of a 1,000 watt HID with less inputs in terms of HVAC and electrical consumption and so on and so forth, but because of the broadened spectrum, the added UV, and the additional far red light that comes in, they're not all the same. They're not all created equal, but typically speaking, LEDs that are full spectrum, that are kind of the dominant animal on the market right now, they definitely produce quite a bit more UV and quite a bit more far red light. And that leads to some interesting things that I really have enjoyed.
All right. Well, you got
I
to
see.
unpack that.
Well, I seem to, what I was going to say is I seem to be able to pull some colors and some frost profiles and maybe even some nuanced difference in alkaloid profile and or flavors when running these broader spectrum fixtures. And I find that to be true of both CMH and LED. There is something to be said for the light spectrum having some morphogenetic effects on the plant itself and stimulating it to perform a little bit differently than you may have been used to. And this is true of strains that I may have run for years and years under high pressure sodium and thought I knew like the back of my hand. And then I run them under CMH or LED, and I find that what I wind up pulling down is definitely sexier and completely different in certain ways. So I am, I'll be honest with you, having been involved in this gig for as long as I have, I've been a pretty staunch skeptic of LED technology for quite some time. And at this point, I generally feel the same way Josh does, that the technology has finally reached a point where it is truly viable. And that's, true for home growers, commercial operators, so on and so forth. You can pull, and again, there is a little bit of a learning curve. There is an acclimation period, I guess, is what I would like to call it. I've learned it a little bit the hard way by kicking around a number of different light fixtures over the past few months. That when I take plants and I initially place them under a new LED fixture, one of the things that I have learned is to be very conservative with regards to the distance from the top of canopy to the bottom of the light. Even if the fixture says this light can be run 8 inches away from your canopy, I usually start at somewhere between 24 and 30 inches and give these plants a chance to acclimate. And then as they grow towards the fixture and grow closer and closer to the diodes, I find that I don't get the same sort of stress that sometimes people run into when they switch, abruptly from HID or HPS rather to LED. You just gotta expect there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve and a little bit of an acclimation period for your plants, and take appropriate measures to counter that. You may have to alter your feed a little bit. You may have to alter your CO2 input into the room, depending on how intense the light is in your growing area.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know that. The grows that I've seen with HPS, you're right. It's a different spectrum in there too. And then when I see the LED grows, it's certainly they've got them down really on top of the canopy. So it's a different method of growing. I would imagine that would take a minute to figure that out.
Takes a minute to figure out, but once you do, it opens up really a whole new world of opportunity. I don't know if you are familiar with any of the vertical racking systems out there, but there are a number of them that are emerging, and people are also building their own out of traditional pallet racking. But they're vertically stacking
Yeah.
LED grows in order to absolutely maximize canopy space within a given square footage. So that is something that is not really applicable to HID growing, and is another huge, just a humongous way for a commercial operator to increase their output in the same given growing space that they're working with.
Yeah, I got you. So that answers a big question for me because that always comes up. I mean, is LED as effective? But so back to one of the other issues, and Josh, I know you deal with this probably a lot. Is yeah, are state and local municipalities pushing LEDs? A lot of them are, but it still seems like. And it was funny. I was talking with one of the SCC companies earlier about all the rules and regs, and they were saying, yeah, it's starting to get really tight. It's always been kind of onerous as an operator with all the rules and regs, but now energy and lighting are really coming into play. So, what have you seen out there? Is it the mosh pit of regulations, and are people moving to LEDs because of that?
I think a lot of that has to do with it in certain states. I know California, they were pushing for every commercial cultivation to be converted over to LED by, I think it was 2023. It's just it goes back to, the power grid. Our power grid in the grand scheme of things, it's not really solid enough to be able to sustain,
It's
you
pretty,
know,
pretty
all of these
creepy and
fixtures
old.
or all of these facilities, 1,000 lighters popping on all at once. So states are definitely moving towards, and they're offering some incentives. Some states will offer rebate programs. It just depends, what city you live in, what region you're in. I mean, you could get a rebate up to 50% sometimes on LEDs. It
Wow.
just depends, like I said, on where you're at. California, they offer a rebate program. Colorado does. Oregon does. I believe Washington does as well. And as we go further, more states are going to go on board. Right now it just depends on the state. For instance, in Oklahoma, they don't really offer a rebate program. That's because, it's more wide open space. They don't have really energy problems when it comes down to it. But that's as of today. Let's say 3 years down the road when, cultivations are all up and running and things are really rolling, that all may change. So it's definitely going on. I wouldn't say that growers are necessarily going towards that route right now, but a lot of growers are preparing for that. So even if they may live in the state of Oklahoma, they're still listening to what's going on out in California. And California and Colorado, that's kind of mecca for the industry. So whatever goes on in California and Colorado, eventually it's going to follow suit throughout the rest of the country.
To Andrew's point, kind of pressure on growers to really understand how these things work. I know that, for multi-state operators that have, say, big facilities in Florida, it's 9 cents a kilowatt hour there and don't really care about it. So energy's cheap. And then you move, same grower moves to Massachusetts.
Right.
And all of a sudden, you're only allowed a certain
Yeah.
amount of energy per square foot of canopy. And it gets a little crazy. So your SOPs get completely turned upside down, and you've had to learn a new growing
Well, and then the
method.
cost associated with it too. I mean, let's be real, LEDs are expensive. They can be, certain fixtures can be up to 5 times more expensive than a traditional HID. It just depends on what you're rolling with. I have noticed, the
Yeah.
good news is that over the past few years, well, not over the past few years, honestly, just over the past year, we've noticed prices on LEDs starting to drop a little bit. So now it's pretty common where you can go pick up a fixture, 720-watt fixture for around $1,000. Whereas 3 years ago, you were paying
Hmm.
$1,400 to $1,500 for one of those fixtures. So the price is gradually starting to decrease.
Well, that's cool. And Andrew, back to you, because I know this is kind of your mantra, man. It's you were telling me, short game versus long game.
Yeah.
When it comes to lighting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, you give me a given space, and you tell me, hey, I need to get from point A to point Z in the shortest period of time in the absolute cheapest manner possible, I'm probably still going to steer you towards HID, and I'm going to hope that down the road, as your entity or your organization grows and you're operating in states where there are rebate opportunities, this is definitely something that we see where people, they get their start using HID or even CMH. And then as they start to become a little bit more profitable, they start to look in earnest at LEDs as an alternative option. And I think that's just going to be kind of a domino effect that starts from the West Coast and heads east and follows the legislation.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, it's interesting because a lot of people view sustainability and basic economics and earning potential as mutually exclusive. And I think you were right, Andrew, when we were talking last time. It's like if you design your facility right, when you use LEDs, you reduce the impacts of your HVAC. You can grow differently, pull out maybe terpenes that you couldn't before, and be able to grow premium product and be able to do that in a way that you're actually saving money in the long run.
Now, that being said, and I would agree with everything that you just said, there are some considerations, as you move towards an LED light, depending on your PPFD levels or your light intensity levels, you may very well need to adjust both your CO2 and also possibly your nutrient regimen. Definitely one of the things I've noticed since experimenting with the various different LED fixtures that I have played with is that my plants drink more.
Really?
They seem to, on an average daily basis, they seem to consume more water. And quite frankly, I've also noticed that they seem to do best if I dial my nutrients up. And in particular, my CalMag, I usually kind of dial it up somewhere on the order of about 20%. And these are, as you introduce more and more light into a growing area, they need that corresponding additional CO2 and nutrient intake in order to properly photosynthesize and make use of the extra light energy that you're feeding them.
Yeah, that is good. It's always something, right? It's the seesaw effect when you change it.
It's always something. You got it.
That's great. Well, look, I could talk to you guys all day. When it comes to lighting, I know you guys know that like the back of your hand. So thanks so much for taking time to hang out for a minute and just shoot the breeze on this, because I know it's really valuable to listeners, especially as people, begin to build out their grows and to think about this from the long haul.
Well, it was a pleasure to spend some time chatting with you as well.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk a little bit.
Yeah. Reach out anytime.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen,
you know where to find us.
I do, as a matter of fact. Thanks so much again, and talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
All right, guys.
Cheers.
Take care. Thanks again for your time.
Bye. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to this week's Sustainable Cannabis Coalition podcast, and we hope you've enjoyed it. Again, you've been listening to Andrew Harling and Josh Armitage with GrowGeneration, one of the founding member companies of the SCC. For more information on sustainable practices, and that includes lighting and more, please reach out to them. You can also find more information on their website, which is growgeneration.com. And yes, that's spelled just the way it sounds. That's growgeneration.com. I'm your host, Dana Hillman with Grow IQ, and look forward to speaking with you next week on our next SCC podcast. See you soon.